I take pleasure to introduce our very own Dean, Dr. Varun Nagaraj, the Dean of SPJIMR Institute of Management and Research. His research, teaching, and practice interests include digital innovation, product management, and entrepreneurship. During a 30-year career in product innovation in Boston and Silicon Valley prior to assuming his role at SPJIMR, he held various product leadership roles, including that of a CEO at a venture-funded startups and public companies. He was also a partner at PRTM Management Consulting. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, an MS in computer engineering from North Carolina State University, an MBA from Boston University, and a PhD from Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School of Management. I request Varun sir to please come on stage for his address.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for taking the time. This is a small 10-minute warm-up for the panel discussion that follows on wise innovation. So just look at it as a way for us to kind of get our head around a couple of terms that hopefully will be useful as we go through the discussion. Surya said, I'm not sure how many wise words you really have to share, but at least try and look the part. So this is my attempt at trying to look the part, right? If that's all I can contribute, no, I'm sorry about that. I hope I can do a little better. So let's just sort of go through this idea of wise innovation and advancing wise innovation, which is sort of something that we've been talking about at SPJIMR. And therefore, when this conclave came up and it was an opportunity to discuss wisdom in leadership, it also made sense to talk about wisdom in driving innovation. And I think as David described it, he talked about both of them. Leadership maybe points you in the right direction, but you need to have a purpose and a process for innovation that gets you there. And so I think it's appropriate for us to sort of lead off today's discussion with sort of a view on what wise innovation could mean. So let me basically just define a couple of terms here. So, we talk of innovation, we often also talk of design at the same time, right? So I'll get that particular phrase out of the way and then we'll dig into innovation. Design is a very purposeful activity. Designers who essentially are looking to make a change see a world that is fundamentally not the world that they would like. And as a designer, your job or your ethos is to figure out how might I shape this situation that I'm in into a preferred or a better situation than what I find. So that's basically where design comes from. It's really not about design as we look at fashion design or product design and so forth. It's about designing a solution that makes a situation better. But not all designs come to fruition, and not all designs are innovative. So it's basically worthwhile to talk about the phrase innovation here. So innovation is really about bringing things to life. Otherwise, it's just an idea, it's just an invention. So innovation is about actually implementing something. But it's also implementing a specific kind of thing. It is implementing something that is new. So novel, or the nov in innovation, that's really what it's saying, right? It's not innovation if it's just a me too of something else. And as David pointed out, we're living in a world full of new novel problems that we're going to have to encounter, and novel problems are going to require novel solutions. And so novelty is really the first part of innovation. But novelty for novelty's sake alone isn't quite innovation. And even though we talked about the dark side of innovation, the intent of innovation has always been to have novel things that produce good outcomes, right? Novelty with utility is really how we define innovation. Now, that may not be how it always unfolds in practice. And sometimes you don't really understand the utility or the consequences or the unintended consequences of things till much, much later. And so I wouldn't necessarily, as a former Silicon Valley guy, I wouldn't necessarily hold that against innovators in particular, but the point well taken. It is worthwhile to be mindful of, with great power comes great responsibility kinds of things. So that's really what we're going to talk about when we talk about innovation. So as we looked at sort of a simplistic innovation framework, and again, tying back to the kinds of things David mentioned, innovation of any sort actually has a purpose, and innovation of any sort has a process that leads to the purpose. So I think it's a nice, simple way to look at innovation. What is the purpose of something that you're trying to do when you're trying to create innovation? And what is the process by which you get there? I like, David, the definition you were having of wise innovation being intentional innovation, that does the right thing for the right reason in the right way for the right outcomes. The right way is really represented by the process. It's doing things in a certain way. Now, the reason for why you're doing it, the kinds of outcomes you're trying to achieve, those other statements basically belong in the purpose. So I think it's a nice, simple way to look at innovation. What is the purpose of innovation and what is the process of innovation? So let's just dig a little bit into the purpose of innovation. Innovation produces a solution or an artifact, right? Something happens. It could be a policy paper. It could be an organizational design. It could be a product. It could be a new service. It could be any of these things. It could be but that solution is basically what you start with. And solutions have impact, and they may have one or more or different kinds of impact. So it's a good way to sort of unpack this concept of purpose into the idea of a solution, and the solution having a range of impacts. So let's just take a look at the impact, because that's typically what you think about when you think of purpose. But my point was that purpose is actually being delivered by something that has been innovated, the output of the innovation process. But if you look at the purpose of wise innovation, and we use these phrases, whether it was Surya using the word of flourishing or David using it, the purpose of wise innovation, as opposed to other kinds of innovation, would be really an emphasis on multidimensional benefits, or the emphasis that what we are aiming for is some sort of a flourishing outcome. Now, what are these multidimensional benefits? What are these flourishing outcomes? And also the fact I want to highlight is that these have actually been discussed and come at from so many different angles that it is really heartening to see people coming at it from an accounting point of view, ending up at the same place that people came to it from the European Union's Responsible Innovation Task Force point of view, or how the United Nations came at it, or how the wisdom scholars are coming at it. When we talk of integration, we're talking about integration well beyond the social sciences. You're talking about integration and a movement that is, I believe, happening. And when Victor Hugo says, there is a time for an idea, when multiple streams of thinking are sort of converging on the same outcome as we are seeing here, I think its time has come. So if you look at sort of the benefits of these, the impact of the solution, they fall into three categories. They fall into benefits that are of an economic nature. You could call it prosperity, sort of material prosperity being one form of benefit that you're looking for from an innovation. And again, the change here, which has come from multiple places, has been a shift from a singular emphasis on shareholder profit to a broader based version and a definition of what prosperity means. So the idea that this is a multi-stakeholder view of prosperity is something that I think we've all converged on from different places. We no longer are having those debates about whose prosperity we're talking about. Now, moving beyond the economic world, you're basically looking at societal benefits, and that means benefiting people. Now, there are three kinds of societal benefits at least, and I will talk about some innovations which have had intended or unintended consequences in this area. So we know that innovations can change individual behaviors. We know innovations can basically change and make people feel better or worse. Social media would be a fantastic example of something that started off with an idea of changing sort of well-being by connecting you to people. It started off with the right kinds of impact that they had in mind about changing individual behaviors to become more social animals and to find your past and rediscover contacts you had lost. And this is where it started off with a perfectly noble set of impact intentions. We also know that it veered off in directions that it is difficult to say that the innovators could have foreseen it. It is difficult to say that the innovator of the like button could have foreseen that a like button would potentially result in teen suicide. So you have unintended consequences, and a wise innovator has to think through to the best of their ability. Though I think it is a very imperfect and almost an impossible task to think through every possible thing that could go wrong, but things will go wrong. And so those are notions of sort of innovations that basically might start off the right way and end up the wrong way. That shouldn't prevent us from trying. So one of the exercises we had at SPJIMR was to have people innovate a product that produced good individual behaviors. How can a product make people better? So, we came up with an idea of urban clap, which many of you have used, for services. And the observation here was that, people still have, at least within our social context here, a hierarchical view of those that provided services and those that consume services. there is a feeling that perhaps you're superior because you're paying for a particular service. That's not the case in many other societies where, service providers and service takers are equals. It just happens to be one has a capability, the other one doesn't. But we tend to force a sense of social status and hierarchy on it. Could we change that? So the idea that basically within the urban clap application, that a wise product designer could look for means of influencing the behavior of that person who's hiring a cleaning maid to come in, to do the right things, to be civil, to be polite, to be appreciative. Those would be examples, again, that I think a wise innovator can drive by way of impacting the positive, pro-social kinds of individual behaviors. You can think about an Instagram feature, for example, that basically has you checking up on friends that have maybe been quiet for a period of time. So it's a concern for their well-being that allows you to basically figure out what you might want to do. That could be a capability. You could be on LinkedIn and you could basically say, there's a mentor in each of us. We all don't mentor because A, we're not confident we could be mentors, or we don't have the time. You talked of generosity. Well, how much do I really want to mentor? How about it if LinkedIn had a capability that allowed people to self-identify as mentors to the best of their ability and connected them with the right kinds of people? So I am a glass half full kind of guy when it comes to technology and innovation. And while unintended consequences can happen, I think good intended consequences can happen as well. And we do know the impact of technology and the impact of innovations in general, social innovations, political innovations, to drive cultural changes, to drive political structural changes. The birth control pill, I think, is a fantastic example of an innovation that basically has driven greater equality amongst the sexes. It has made the society a less patriarchal society. So innovations can have positive social impact of that kind. Cultural norms can change. Political structural changes can be driven by innovation. It can also be co-opted. Take a look at the Arab Spring, of 2008 and 2009, and the degree to which that political movement was driven by the availability of innovation that the activists were able to use before the government was able to lock in on those kinds of things. But on the other hand, we also have this exact same technologies being used by totalitarian and authoritarian governments to impose their view of authoritarianism. So I hesitate to put value judgment on innovation in particular. It can be good, can be bad, but the fact is it has an impact. And I think we as wise innovators need to be aware of that. And the third part, of course, is the notion of sustainability or the environmental impact that innovation can have. And even here, again, looking at sort of the glass half full, half empty part, you guys are all familiar with cryptocurrency and the fact that there's a lot of energy that was being used to mine for these tokens. So I think there was at some point, perhaps 1% of the world's energy was being used for electricity to go mine new tokens. And the industry as a whole basically changed their algorithmic approach from what they were calling, which was called proof of work, to a different approach called proof of stake, which was far more energy efficient than what the previous one was. There was no reason for them to change it. This was a group of industry people in the financial crypto world, right? Not the people you think of as being the most bleeding heart, let me do good for the planet kinds of folks, right? But even that community was able to come together with no financial incentives to do the right thing. So I think being aware of impact, I think, is the first step. And impact basically is of a three-dimensional nature. And just pointing out the fact that people have come to it from the same sources. The United Nations, basically in 1987, with the Brundtland Report, laid out these three aspects as what sustainable development is. So sustainable development was viewed, or is viewed, as a perfect balance between these three outcomes. It is about being able to achieve the needs of today without compromising your ability to achieve those needs or for future generations and in the future. Or people from the corporate side, when they talk about the triple bottom line, and yes, as Snehal said, everything can be greenwashed, and that's something, or purpose washed or triple bottom line washed, but that's just a fact of life. No matter what you come up with, it can get washed. So we just need to have the ability to see through the washing and see through the BS, if you will. But the fact is, the triple bottom line is a different way in which people have come at this. ESG, which was an accounting construct, right, is essentially the same thing. It is looking at these three kinds of impact and noting that societal and environmental impacts, which are the E and the S, can basically have an adverse effect on the economic impact. That's really what the ESG folks are looking to do. So to me, what is heartening about this particular discussion is the fact that we, I think as a group, no matter where we come from, have realized that benefits are multidimensional in nature. And I think that's the first thing to think about when we think of wise innovation, have caring about the fact that we want to achieve this kind of an outcome. Then, of course, the question is, what's the process of wise innovation? If outcomes or doing the right thing is what we want to do, how do we go about doing the right thing? And for those of us who have been in the innovation business, whether it's on the product side or on the social entrepreneurship side or organizational side, we know that there are a set of principles that have driven innovation through history, through the ages. And I'll just list some of them. And these are the principles that drive an innovator. Now, what I'm going to ask is, how do they make a wise innovator? Because each individual set of principles by itself is a relatively narrow view, which has as much an ability to create harm as it does good. So what a wise innovator is able to do is really be a virtuoso, as you described, David, across these kinds of disciplines. These are the areas that really need to be front and center to a wise innovator, with the ability to integrate across them. So let me just walk through them. I think it's fair to say that a lot of innovation begins with the idea of Francis Bacon and scientific reasoning, right? The idea is observations allow you to figure out and gauge what a current situation is. You create a set of hypotheses, and then you go around and test them, and you never have absolute confidence in any finding. That, to me, the humility of scientific reasoning is what appeals to me the most. You're never fully sure. You're always willing to accept you could be wrong. And there is no such thing as an absolute truth, even in physics. Anything basically is a probabilistic outcome, but it is based on our ability to recognize it to the best of our capability. So when you begin with that, design thinking basically says, if we're trying to understand a phenomenon and we're trying to basically intervene in that particular phenomenon, and scientific reasoning simply gives you an understanding of the phenomenon, right? It's not asking about a solution. We move to design thinking, which puts the user. And as you can see, the humanistic elements of wise innovation coming in there, because you're putting the user in the center of this kind of innovation here. But design thinking by itself isn't enough. Unintended consequences can happen, as we said. So what systems thinking and systems dynamics allows you to do is to understand the consequences of what it is that you're looking to do. It allows you to think about the fact that what are the second and third order effects of something that I'm potentially looking to intervene on. And so systems thinking places innovation in a larger context, which I think we all agree is a building block towards wisdom, recognizing that things impact others. That was a beautiful metaphor you started with today, Surya, the jewels and the web. What systems thinking is doing is basically defining the elements of the web. You are not going to be able to understand dharana or prabhava without having the ability to do systems thinking. Now, to give credit where it's due, responsible innovation is a concept that has emerged from a long body of literature that we academics know as science, technology, and society. So STS is a whole rich body of academic literature that has looked at the impact of science and technology on society. And coming out of that over the last 10, 15 years is something that the European Union, to a large degree, has adopted. And they use the phrase responsible innovation. So, it conflicted me, saying, well, why is wise innovation different than responsible innovation? Now, I think we like the word wise a little bit more. I don't know what the color for responsible is. I do know what the color for wise is, right? But what is responsible innovation? So responsible innovation, as defined, that a lot of scholars and practitioners agree upon, has some elements that are pretty interesting to think about. It has an element of anticipation. It basically says, if you're a responsible innovator, your principle that you need to be guided by is one where you have to anticipate the consequences. So coming back again to the idea of using systems thinking appropriately. So I think that's the first part. The second part they emphasize is that of reflection, taking time to think through what might happen. Are you doing the right thing, and so forth. The third one they talk about is inclusion or engagement. Who all have you included in the creation of this innovation? And the last one is an important one, which is accountability. As an innovator, your job isn't done when you have innovated. Your job is just starting when you've innovated. Your product that goes out into the wild, into the field, or your organizational change that you create may very well have repercussions you weren't aware of. And it is your job to understand those particular repercussions and do something about it, to respond to what it is you see. So that's how the European Union world has defined responsible innovation. I think it's a very tight, good definition. It complements a lot of the other sort of principles that I think an innovator needs to keep in mind. And the final part around critical reasoning is just being aware as a wise innovator to not fall prey to your own biases, not fall prey to, some get bedazzled by some kind of data which may or may not be true and so forth. So these and more form sort of the principles, if you will, of wise innovation. Now, the question is, how do you put it into practice? A principle is something which is kind of like a guiding post. It's a guiding principle that says, these are things I should do. The question is, how do you do it? And that's really where I think management education and us as leaders and executives, this is where we come in. That those principles can be put into practice at multiple levels. You as an individual innovator can be mindful of its impact on users. You can be mindful of the impact of innovation on society. You can be mindful of all of the responsible parameters we talked about. But you can also do it at the team level. So if you're within an organizational structure, I would challenge those within organizations to say, what are you doing within your organizations at the team level in order to drive wise innovation? So in the context of AI, not the first one that would come to mind, but to give credit where it's due, McKinsey, as they are incorporating AI into various things that they do and into their clients' work, have basically a notion of a team that they put together. So every team that is an innovation team building anything new or doing anything new has to have, and this might sound horrible, somebody from legal, right? And somebody who's an ethicist, right? So somebody from the non-technical field that is part of the innovation team. So that is just one simple practice one could use to make sure that wise innovation principles are put into practice, because things only happen into practice when you have a structure, when you have a cadence, when you have opportunities, you have forced engagements and so on. And that's what we do as managers. What we do as managers is provide an environment in which these principles can actually be enacted. And that's really what one could do at the team level. Companies can do this. Many of you from corporate, I remember all of my quarterly business reviews, and I'm sure you have them too. A quarterly business review is a fantastic time for an organization to step back and say, as we look at our portfolio of innovations, let's look at it in terms of more than just the numbers. Let's look at the other kinds of impact that this portfolio of innovations has. And even if that's a conversation that happens just once a quarter, I still think it is a step up than not having that conversation at all. So that might be an example, again, of a simple practice that an organization could put in. We can have conversations at the societal level like we're having today. I think that's an important thing. And at the government level, in some cases, regulations are a way by which a government can force the kind of wise innovation that you want in practice. And while it might feel like overreach sometimes, and regulation always lags the advanced speed at which innovation moves, so you can't really count on the government and regulations to set things right, the government does have a role in making it happen. So if you look at that and say, that's wise innovation, a process that is infused with sort of the wise kinds of principles applied in a right way, purpose that actually takes a look at a balanced outcome. I do think there's one missing piece, and that kind of ties back to what we have today, which is there has to be a mindset as well that an individual needs to bring to the table. Now, what's the difference between a process and a mindset? A mindset is basically a frame through which you approach a problem. There's a difference between a principle, which is something you can do and enact, and a mindset, which is how you basically look at a given situation. For example, everybody's familiar with the idea of a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. A growth mindset says, no matter what situation I'm in, I believe, right? It's a belief. You cannot put it into a principle and a practice, right? A growth mindset is one where you basically say, I believe that anything is possible. You're not born with a fixed set of, assets and capabilities. Fixed mindset believes that what you have is what you can work with. So that's what a mindset is and why that's different. And I'm going to contend on my next and last slide that there is such a thing called a wise innovation mindset. And we've tried to draw upon what the CWIL has produced, right? The scholars that we've had work with us. Besides David, Surya put up names of Monica Ardell. So drawing upon that, drawing upon things from all the way from Aristotle, combining it with the Gita. Here's basically what, we currently think of. So what is this wise innovation mindset? The way you look at the world. And you look at two things in there. There is a wisdom mindset, which we spent a lot of time on. Now, it's really a synthesis, hopefully, of Aristotle and the Gita and so forth. And we've derived those in a certain way. Of course, your mileage could vary. You could argue a different set of 3-4 things. And you would be right, and so would I, right? So my point is this: I don't think there's one answer there. But I want to point out the entrepreneurial mindset. Why is that sitting in there in the middle of a wise innovation approach? Wisdom can potentially degenerate into just talk, even though action is a key part of wisdom. The fact is, there are aspects of the entrepreneurial mindset that I don't think you can just wish away and say, I hope all this never happened. It is here. It is like testosterone. If you're an athlete, you need testosterone in order to compete, male or female, right? But testosterone in excess is not a great thing either. But without testosterone, you would not be even in the game. So the entrepreneurial mindset is a necessary but not sufficient condition for innovation. And by ignoring it, we ignore it at our own peril. It's very easy in conclaves like this to wash away, the grimy realities of innovation and entrepreneurship and so forth, and say CEOs, have these defects and so forth, and we are going to have pure thoughts. Well, we should have pure thoughts, but it has to build on what exists, which is entrepreneurship drives the innovation process. But again, look at it from a mindset point of view. A wise innovator has to have an entrepreneurial mindset, which is really about the fact that they are proactive, they're driven, they're risk takers, and yes, it is ego driven, and yes, they might be too hasty to take action. They're comfortable with failure. I mean, you know what these attributes are and what the mindsets of entrepreneurship are. And the means-based action is really the theoretical basis of entrepreneurship, which is to say an entrepreneur looks at me, what can I do to impact the world? And that's basically how entrepreneurship begins. And now look at the opposite side. In the wisdom world, you're looking at not me, you're looking at us, right? We're looking at not a hedonistic view of the world, you're looking at a eudaimonistic view of the world. So it's a different view. You're looking for truth at all costs, right? And the first three dimensions, by the way, are affiliate Monica's dimensions, if you will, of wisdom. It's a part of the three-dimensional scale that a good portion of academia, at least, is agreed upon. The fourth one comes from the Gita, the idea that responsible action is something that anybody, the karma yogi, is responsible for, despite uncertainty that exists, right? The confidence to take action despite not having all the facts. Now, you compare these two and you can see the tension. You can see the fact that this is what people would call a paradox. But we have understood as managers that life consists of paradoxes you have to manage. You have to be good, you have to be fast, you have to be profitable, you have to be kind. These are just the realities of the world. And I would say the essence of the wise innovation mindset is the ability to manage this paradox between an entrepreneurial mindset that propels you towards getting things done and a wisdom mindset that basically cautions you and pulls you back and has you be more thoughtful. So that's essentially sort of the view where I think wisdom principles cannot be looked at in isolation of other principles and other mindsets that drive the innovation process. Otherwise, I don't believe it will be practical. It will be a wonderful paper and a wonderful set of discussions. It will be impossible to implement it in the real world. So with that, let me sort of, we're going to have a detailed introduction about our panelists. But what we are going to be discussing with our panelists is around their view on what wise innovation is, how they incubate it, what are they doing in their organizations to create what they see as wise innovation. What else should we be doing as a group, as companies, as people, and so forth? And what are going to be some barriers that come along here? So, eminent panel. But let me have you introduce the panelists, and thank you. And I hope you look for we get something awesome out of the panel. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. It did take us back to our design and innovation class.